UM and FIU strap up for conference play as the basketball season winds down.
We dive into the Dolphins' playoff elimination after a frigid fight versus Kansas City.
And Miami hosts sailing trials for athletes looking to compete in this year's Olympics. All of this and more coming up on the sideline.
Hello, South Florida, and welcome to the Sideline, the place where you get all the highlights for your South Florida teams. I'm Kenneth Bueno.
I'm Nicolette Esper, and the Sideline starts now.
This morning, conference plays in full swing in college basketball, and South Florida teams already have some intense matchups under their belts.
Sideline's Anthony Cruz has more on how UM and FIU are faring in their respective conferences.
It's been a rocky start to conference play for the Canes. After beginning the month of January by upsetting Clemson, they have since been upset twice at home at the hands of two unranked teams. First Wake Forest and now Louisville. This was the first time that the team had been healthy since mid-December, and the rush showed. Let's start with the positives though. Wooga Poplar is back in action, and he led the way in the first half with 13 points. The second half though would be the Matthew Cleveland show. However, untimely turnovers, a lack of presence in the paint, and a shocking 28% shooting from the field in the second half from the Canes would lead to them blowing the lead. Meanwhile, the Louisville duo of Mike James and Brandon Huntley Hatfield were unstoppable, scoring 26 and 22 points respectively. The final score was Louisville 80, Canes 71. This is what head coach Jim Larinaga has to say now that they fell to 2-2 in conference play.
Well, you know, again, I'd like to give Louisville a lot of credit, but quite frankly, we were lethargic. The ball didn't move the way we wanted to. We didn't execute anything after a timeout. We called a timeout. We called for a set play, and the player with the ball didn't run it. So when guys think they should take things on their own instead of working with their teammates, we're no good.
UM will get a much-needed road win on Saturday against Virginia Tech. However, unlike for the Canes, home cooking has been exactly what FIU has needed to kick off conference play, as with their win against UTEP on Saturday, they swept the week's competition in the Ocean Bank. The Panthers left much to be desired in the first half, going down big due to turnovers and an inability to match UTEP's shooting. They will begin to show signs of life in the second half, though. This dunk from Seth Pinckney will lead FIU to scoring 7 unanswered. However, it will take the entire team to rally back. Javante Hawkins, who began the game ice cold, and Deshaun Giddens would lead the way on offense. And Arturo Dean showed that even when the shots aren't falling, he can still make as much of an impact as anyone else on the floor. The game-clinching Dean steal and bucket from Mohamed Sanago was the culmination of an 11-0 run in the final 2 minutes of the game. The final score was FIU 72, UTEP 68. The Panthers now find themselves tied for second place in Conference USA. Following what was their first back-to-back wins of the season, they will look to continue rolling when they go on the road to face Liberty on Thursday. For Caplin News, I'm Anthony Cruz.
After a 4-game homestand, the Miami Heat slugged it out in their first game of the latest road trip, an overtime thriller against the Brooklyn Nets. Miami was down as much as 12 in the first half, so it was no small task for Tyler Hero to light a fire in the Heat's comeback. Hero had 29 points and 11 rebounds. Jimmy Butler had 31 points to give the Heat its third straight win in overtime. Final score, Heat 96, Brooklyn 95. Miami heads up north to face the Toronto Raptors tomorrow at 7:30 p.m.
It was an overtime thriller in Amarant Bank on Monday. The Panthers got out to an early 2-0 lead in the first period. One of those came off the stick of Sam Bennett, who would finish the game with a pair of goals. Anaheim was trailing the majority of the game, but slowly they worked their way back, finally tying the game early in the third period to force overtime. Alex Killorn netted the OT winner for the Ducks, sealing the Panthers' fate 5-4. Florida will face the Red Wings on Wednesday.
The fourth coldest game in NFL history marked the end of the season for the Miami Dolphins in a 26-7 loss to the Kansas City Chiefs over the weekend. Miami now hasn't won a playoff game since 2000. That's the longest in the NFL. With that, we'll bring in our studio analyst, Zeph Leon, for more on what fell flat for the Dolphins in that outing. Obviously, the weather was a big factor. That was a talking point even before the game started and when the matchup was announced. But what really happened in that game and near the end of the season where the Dolphins sort of fell short?
Yeah, as you mentioned, that's not a record you want to have. You know, the longest playoff win streak, drought, in this case. And that game, the Dolphins were banged up going in, but I'm not surprised by the result. The Dolphins offense played very poorly. The play calling was not great. And aside from that, touchdown, that fluke touchdown that Tyreek Hill, made a great play on an underthrown ball, the Dolphins offense couldn't execute. And for the most part, the injuries on the team were on the defense. There were some key injuries on the offense, and some guys were playing banged up. But the Dolphins defense, I think, played well enough and gave the offense enough opportunity, and the Dolphins offense, didn't help them out with that, get them on track. And this is a missed opportunity for the Dolphins. Aaron Rodgers is injured this year. The Bills struggled this year. The Patriots weren't great, and they had a 3-game lead in the division, and they choked that away. The Dolphins, they kind of didn't capitalize on a great opportunity, and not to mention, the Chiefs also struggled this year. Joe Burrow and the Bengals, didn't make the playoffs, and Joe Burrow got hurt. So it's only going to get harder next year. With Aaron Rodgers returning, Joe Burrow returning, the Chiefs might pick up, where they left off a bit. So the Dolphins didn't capitalize on a big moment here.
And for the Dolphins, a tough loss. And we had talked about it before. We talked about it way before, that the Super Bowl window for the Dolphins, was starting to open up. Yeah. And how many years you have left until it closes. That loss might have just cemented a lot of fans' opinions on whether that Super Bowl window is fully done with. With that, we'll get into our biggest W and biggest L's of the week that we've seen in the world of sports so far. We've got a lot of stories to cover. Zeth, we'll start with you. Yeah. What's your biggest W and L that you saw over the week?
I actually have two biggest W's. I couldn't leave this out. D'Amico Ryans and C.J. Stroud, both rookies, winning not only their division, which is the first time that's ever happened, they won a playoff game. And C.J. Stroud's playing great. D'Amico Ryans' defense is playing great. And the Lions, Jared Goff getting revenge on the team that traded him away, that didn't want him. And the Lions end a drought that the Dolphins now have the record of, won their first playoff game since 1992. The Lions and C.J. Stroud and D'Amico Ryans, those are my biggest W's.
And what's your biggest L over the week?
My biggest L has to be the Eagles. They started the season 10-1. They finished the season 1-6, and they lost, first round exit in the playoffs, 32-9 against the Bucs. It was a rough stretch. They were giving up 30 points per game during that stretch. Not a great look for the Eagles.
It's hard to argue against the Eagles in this one. It's, the team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they played. You'd expect that to be an easy W. Nikki, your biggest W and L of the week so far?
My biggest W and L, my biggest W is going to be the Heat versus the Nets. It was a 96-95, I believe, and it was in overtime. Jimmy Butler tried to get it in with the last 5 seconds. He got a shot, and it was rimmed off, and he didn't get it in, so they went to a 5-second overtime, and Mikal Bridges tried to, it was a close shot that he tried to get in for the Nets to take the win, but the Heat defense was pretty defensive.
Yeah.
And they played a really great game. And that was my win. I think they deserved that win for having a nice win against the Nets, even though I'm a little biased sometimes. But it's fine, because my biggest L gets to be the Dolphins versus the Chiefs.
Oh my Lord.
I never in my life thought I was going to be rooting for Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes when they go up against the Dolphins. Not the favorite team for me.
The Dolphins didn't play too well, so.
The Dolphins did, where, had the weather like you were talking about, the -4 degrees, I believe it was. It was freezing cold. There was no offense other than the Tyreek Hill touchdown, which was a great play. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, exciting. But, the Dolphins lost, and I get to say on here that they lost, and it brings joy to my eyes.
It's fine, because last semester we were rubbing in the Jets losing games, and I think it's fine that you come back with that. Let's get into my biggest W of the week so far. It's Eric Spoelstra, the big contract he signed for the Miami Heat, an extension for 8 years, $120 million. It is one of the biggest contracts in NBA coaching history. He's got 725 wins with the franchise, which is, I believe, third among active coaches that are still in the league, along with Greg Popovich Popovich. So there's a lot to celebrate. If you're Miami fans, you've loved what Erik Spoelstra has given you as a team, as a coach. So for fans, they're going to be very excited to have Erik Spoelstra back for another 8 years and at least know that he's locked up for that amount of time as he can try to get them back to the NBA Finals. My biggest L, though, is going to be in college basketball. And while Anthony had a package on UM and FIU, you know, having their own stretches in conference play, Gonzaga, what happened to the Bulldogs? They ended up with a big L, 77-76 versus Santa Clara. And for the first time since 2016, they're out of the top 25 in the AP poll. So it's not good news at all for the people of Gonzaga. They're going to have to get back. Mark Few's going to have to reconcile with his team and get back going for hoops. So biggest L has to go to Gonzaga.
Wow, we just love our biggest wins and biggest L's. We're going to switch over. Here's what's next on the sideline.
I've been competing in the 470 class for the better part of 20 years.
Miami hosts sailing trials for the upcoming Olympic Games in Paris, and we break down our picks for the of South Florida pool. We'll take a timeout and be back in a moment.
Yeah, our time to grind, our time to shine. Ha, ha, ha. They don't want it with us.
Miranda is on top again. Give it to Gary Sexton. Lawson Peel takes his first playoff win.
Radcliffe Art and Design Incubator is the velocity accompanying the fellow's rudder, as in a boat. Unless there is movement or action, the planned direction is of little consequence. We encourage the creative ideas into action, and from the experience of doing, we critically assess the feedback, adjust, and set out to rediscover the potentialities of an entrepreneurial mindset.
For the 33rd Olympiad in Paris this year, athletes across the country came to Miami for the U.S. team's sailing trials.
Sideline Stan Boburn was at the Miami Yacht Club with more.
I'm here in Miami Beach on the last day of the U.S. Olympic team trials, sailing for the Paris 2024 Games. I spoke with an athlete.
We've ended up finishing 6th in the regatta out of the 9 boats that we were sailing.
And this class of sailboat is unique because there must be one man and one woman in the boat. And that's along the theme of this Olympic Games, where there are the same number of medals available to male competitors as the female competitors, and the same number of female competitors as male competitors. That's the theme of this Olympic Games. I've been competing in the 470 class for the better part of 20 years. I graduated college in 2005 and promptly was involved with the U.S. sailing team afterwards, with my first Olympic Games being the 2008 Games in Beijing. This coming Olympics in July in Marseille will be my 5th Olympic Games.
Good luck, Team USA. For Caplin News, I'm Stan Boburn.
Looking at the week ahead, we have some games to discuss about. So first up, we have on the ice, Florida Panthers on Wednesday playing the Detroit Red Wings. How do we feel about this?
I think it's pretty good so far. I know that they did lose in overtime to the Anaheim Ducks recently, but we know one thing about the Panthers this season is that they can win games and win games in a row. They were on a pretty large winning streak earlier in the season, so I don't see them having a big problem against Detroit. I also don't see them having a big problem against Minnesota. I think they'll go 2 straight right after that loss against Anaheim. They've got a lot in their belly.
Yeah, I also believe that they're going to be going on their win streak. This is their 2nd time seeing the Red Wings this season, so I think the Panthers are going to take this for sure. Now, next up we have the Miami Heat. They're playing Wednesday with the Toronto Raptors, and then they play the Atlantic Hawks on Sunday. I think they can't hop off their win streak right now. I think they got this in the bag for both games.
Really? You think they're going to win all the games? I don't know. I always figure that somehow Miami, even in games where you'd predict them to win, they find a way to lose. So I think against Toronto, I think they'll do fine up north. But when they get to Atlanta, I don't know if they're going to survive the likes of Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. They've been playing pretty well. I know they're only 16 and 23 on the year, but Miami's going to find a way to lose the game just because they always do on variety. But they'll get the win Sunday against the Magic. That's a good interstate rivalry. I know the Magic are pretty good this year, but I think the Heat will take care.
Just a reminder that if you want to keep up with updates, fun segments, and much more from our crew, you could follow our Instagram for all things Sideline. You could follow us at sideline.caplin.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'm Kenneth Bueno.
And I'm Nicolette Esper. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week on the Sideline.